I want you to think about something for just a moment before we get into any of the politics. Think about what it feels like to hear an air raid siren, not the kind you might have heard at a school drill when you were a kid, not a test, a real one. The kind that means something is in the air and it is coming toward you, and you have somewhere between 60 seconds and 3 minutes to get yourself and everyone you love into a shelter before the sky changes. That is what millions of people in Israel heard today. And in Tel Aviv, a modern, vibrant civilian city on the Mediterranean coast, home to nearly 500,000 people, the sirens weren't just a warning, they were followed by impact. At least one person is dead, more than 20 civilians are wounded, and the people who were on the streets of Tel Aviv this morning, the people who went to sleep last night not knowing that by morning their country would be in the middle of the largest military operation against Iran in history, are now picking up the pieces of a city that just became a target. This video is not about politics. It is not about who was right and who was wrong. It is not about whether Operation Epic Fury was justified. It is not about Trump or Netanyahu or Khamenei or the Gang of Eight. This video is about the people, because behind every number in every breaking news alert, behind 1 killed and 20+ wounded, there is a human being, a family, a story that did not end the way anyone planned when they woke up this morning, and that story deserves to be told. Most channels covering this story right now are focused on the geopolitics, the military strategy, the congressional reaction, the presidential statements, and those things matter. We cover all of them here. But Senate Decode also believes that the most important thing a political channel can do is remind you that behind every policy decision, behind every airstrike and every retaliation and every resolution vote, there are human beings living with the consequences. If that's the kind of political coverage you're looking for, honest, grounded, and never losing sight of what's real, hit subscribe right now. This community is growing fast, and I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about what happened in Tel Aviv today. Let's start with what we know, because in a moment like this, the facts matter more than anything else. Hours after the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, the joint military strike on Iranian military infrastructure, missile sites, and leadership compounds, Iran retaliated. This was not a surprise. Anyone who has followed the dynamics of this conflict understood that Iran would respond. The only questions were how, when, and where. The answer came fast. Iran launched missiles toward Israel. Multiple cities activated air raid sirens. Israel's air defense systems, among the most sophisticated in the world, engaged the incoming projectiles. Many were intercepted, but not all of them. In Tel Aviv, at least one missile got through. Israeli police confirmed that one person was killed and more than 20 civilians were wounded in the strike. Fox News chief foreign policy correspondent Trey Yingst and Israeli police spokesman Dean Elston reported live from the scene. Not from a studio, not from behind a desk, but from the actual location where the strike hit in real time as emergency responders were still working the area. That is what retaliation looks like when it lands. Not a statistic, not a talking point. A street in a civilian city with emergency vehicles and wounded people and the particular kind of chaos that follows the moment a foreign country's missile hits your neighborhood. And this was just the beginning. Reports coming in throughout the morning indicated that Iran had targeted not only Israel, but American military bases across the Middle East. Bahrain activated air raid sirens. Explosions were reported near American facilities. The Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen announced they would resume strikes on Red Sea shipping. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, was reported closed. This is what escalation looks like in practice, not a slow, predictable staircase, a sudden, simultaneous expansion of a conflict in multiple directions at once, each one carrying its own set of consequences that cascade outward in ways that are genuinely difficult to predict. Let's talk about Tel Aviv for a moment, because I think a lot of Americans have a mental image of the cities they see in conflict coverage that doesn't fully match the reality. Tel Aviv is not a military installation. It is not a government compound. It is a city. It has beaches, it has restaurants and coffee shops and art galleries, it has universities, it has a tech sector so vibrant that people call it the Silicon Valley of the Middle East. It is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the region and home to a population that is, in many ways, deeply cosmopolitan, people who grew up alongside social media, who listen to the same music as young people in New York or London or Tokyo, who have spent their entire lives knowing that the possibility of conflict exists, but building full, rich, ordinary lives alongside that knowledge anyway. Because that is what people do. They live. They take their kids to school. They go to work. They meet friends for dinner. They worry about rent and relationships and what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. They exist in the full, complicated, irreducible way that human beings exist. Not as symbols, not as statistics, not as geopolitical abstractions. And this morning, some of those people were in the wrong place. One of them did not survive. More than 20 others are in hospitals right now, dealing with injuries that will mark their bodies and the bodies of the people who love them for the rest of their lives. Injuries that came without warning, from a missile fired by a government they have no relationship with, in retaliation for a decision made by leaders in Jerusalem and Washington. They didn't choose this. They didn't vote for it. They were simply present. And their presence in this story, their humanity, their ordinariness, their absolute right to live a full life without a missile landing in their neighborhood is the most important thing about this entire day. I want to try to convey something that is genuinely difficult to convey through a screen, and that is what it actually feels like to live in a city that is under missile fire. Because there is a gap, a significant, morally important gap, between knowing intellectually that a conflict is happening and understanding what that conflict costs the people inside it. When the siren sounds in Tel Aviv, residents have been trained from childhood to move immediately to a shelter or a reinforced room. Hotels have designated safe areas. Apartment buildings have shelter floors. Families have drills. There is an entire infrastructure of survival built into ordinary life in a country that has lived with this reality for generations. But infrastructure is not the same as invulnerability, and training is not the same as fearlessness. When you hear that siren, when you grab your children and run for the shelter and crouch on the floor with your hands over your head and listen to the sound of interceptions in the sky above you, some of those interceptions succeed and the missile disintegrates before it can reach you, and some of them don't, and you don't know which one it's going to be until it's over. That uncertainty, that 60-second window between the siren and the silence, is something that most Americans have never experienced and cannot fully imagine. It is a kind of fear that becomes ordinary through repetition, which is perhaps the most disturbing thing about it. The way that extraordinary danger can become part of the texture of everyday life, woven into the routine alongside school pickups and grocery runs and all the other small things that make up an ordinary day. The people of Tel Aviv have lived with this for decades. They have internalized it in ways that shape their psychology, their culture, their relationship to safety and danger, and the fragility of normal life. Today, for more than 20 of them, the worst happened. And for one of them, there is no tomorrow. Now, I want to talk directly to you, to the American watching this from home, because I think there's a temptation when you're watching events unfold in a city thousands of miles away to feel like this is someone else's story, a foreign story, a Middle East story, a story that is happening over there to other people in a conflict that has nothing to do with your daily life. I want to gently but firmly push back on that. This is your story too. First, because American military personnel are in harm's way right now. Iran has fired missiles at American military bases across the Middle East. The reports coming in describe explosions near American facilities in multiple countries. There are American men and women in uniform who woke up this morning to incoming fire. Some of them may be among the casualties that haven't been fully reported yet. These are your fellow citizens serving in your name in a conflict that your government chose to enter, and they deserve to be part of your awareness of what this day costs. Second, because the economic consequences of this conflict are going to reach your kitchen table faster than you might expect. The Strait of Hormuz is reportedly closed. That is the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. When that strait is disrupted, when tankers can't move freely through it, oil prices move. And when oil prices move, gasoline prices move. Heating costs move. The price of goods that are transported, which is essentially everything, moves. You are going to feel this conflict at the pump and in your grocery bill before you fully feel it in the news. Third, and this is the most important one, because the people of Tel Aviv who were wounded or killed today are not abstractions. They are human beings. And part of what it means to be a citizen of a powerful nation that takes military action in the world is accepting some moral responsibility for what that action sets in motion. Not guilt, not blame, responsibility. The willingness to look at the full picture, including the retaliation, including the civilian casualties, including the human cost on every side, and to hold all of it in your awareness as you form your opinions about what your government should do next. That is what informed citizenship looks like, and it is harder than just picking a side and cheering or condemning. By mid-morning, the political response to Iran's retaliation was already well underway. On one side, supporters of the operation pointed to Iran's missile strikes as evidence that the regime is exactly as dangerous and destabilizing as they claimed. Iran fired on Israel. Iran fired on American bases. Iran targeted civilian areas. This, they argued, is who we are dealing with. A regime that responds to military pressure by attacking civilians in a major city and going after American personnel. The case for the operation, in their view, had just been made by Iran itself. On the other side, critics of the operation pointed to the same events as evidence of exactly what they warned about. The strikes have triggered retaliation. Civilians in Tel Aviv are wounded and dead. American bases are under fire. The conflict is expanding. This, they argued, is what happens when you launch a major military offensive without a clear strategic endgame. You get escalation, and escalation has a human face. Both of those arguments are being made in good faith by people who are genuinely trying to work through a difficult moral and strategic situation. But here is what both of them miss. The person who was killed in Tel Aviv this morning did not die as evidence for an argument. They died as a person. They had a name. They had people who loved them. They had things they were planning to do tomorrow that they will never get to do. And the 20-plus people who are wounded and in hospitals right now are not data points in a debate about the merits of Operation Epic Fury. They are human beings in pain, being treated by doctors and nurses who are working in a city that just had a missile land in it, doing their jobs with the particular combination of skill and exhaustion and determination that emergency medical workers bring to the worst days. Political arguments have their place. The strategic debate matters. The constitutional questions matter. The question of escalation and endgame matters enormously, but none of those arguments should be allowed to crowd out the simple, irreducible fact that real people are being hurt today. And that fact should be the first thing we hold on to, before the analysis, before the partisanship, before the scorekeeping. Let's zoom out from Tel Aviv for a moment and look at the full regional picture, because the human toll of today's events extends far beyond one city and one country. Iran retaliated not just against Israel, but against American military installations across multiple countries. Bahrain, a small island nation in the Persian Gulf that hosts a major American naval base, activated air raid sirens as Iranian missiles targeted the facility. Kuwaiti military officials confirmed that Iran targeted its Ali al-Salem air base, resulting in injuries to soldiers and material damage. The Houthis in Yemen, an Iranian-backed armed group, announced they would resume strikes on shipping in the Red Sea. That decision affects not just military personnel, but commercial sailors, shipping workers, and the millions of people around the world who depend on goods that travel through those waters. Multiple countries across the Middle East closed their airspace as the conflict expanded. Flights were diverted. Passengers stranded mid-journey found themselves rerouted to airports they hadn't planned to visit in countries they weren't prepared to be in, trying to reach families they were suddenly very uncertain about getting home to. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. The Secretary General condemned the strikes, both the original American and Israeli offensive and the Iranian retaliation, and called for an immediate ceasefire. Egypt's foreign minister warned of dire repercussions for Middle East security and stability. Count the people in all of that. The soldiers at American bases across the Gulf who spent their morning under missile fire. The Kuwaiti troops who were injured. The sailors in the Red Sea who are now navigating a more dangerous shipping lane. The passengers stuck in airports from Tel Aviv to Dubai. The families in multiple countries trying to reach their loved ones through jammed phone lines and uncertain news reports. And back in Tel Aviv, the family of the person who was killed. The families rushing to hospitals to find their injured. The children who were in school this morning when the sirens went off and who will carry the memory of that sound for the rest of their lives. This is the human geography of a conflict in its first hours, before it has had time to fully unfold, before anyone knows how long it will last, how far it will spread, or how many more people will be added to the list of those who woke up this morning not knowing their lives were about to change. No one can tell you with certainty what happens next. That's the honest answer. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how this plays out is either guessing or lying. What we do know is this: Iran has signaled through its foreign minister in an interview with NBC News that it is interested in de-escalation and ready to talk once the joint American-Israeli strikes end. That is a signal worth paying attention to, not because it means the conflict is about to end, but because it suggests that Iran, even in the middle of retaliating, is looking for a door out. Whether that door exists, whether the conditions for a ceasefire can be established before the casualty count grows significantly higher, depends on decisions that are being made right now by people in Jerusalem and Washington and Tehran that the rest of us have no ability to influence. What we can do, what we owe to the people whose stories are unfolding on the ground right now, is pay attention. Really pay attention, not just to the political scoreboard, not just to which party looks stronger or weaker coming out of this, not just to the approval ratings and the congressional votes and the war powers debates, but to the people, to the person who was killed in Tel Aviv this morning and whose family is grieving right now, to the more than 20 who are injured, to the American service members who are in harm's way, to the Iranian civilians who have spent decades under a regime they didn't choose and who are now living through airstrikes that they reportedly, heartbreakingly, welcomed because they hate that regime more than they fear the bombs. To all of them. Because here is the thing about political power. Here is the thing that gets lost in the noise of every breaking news cycle and every partisan argument and every vote and every statement. Political power is exercised by a very small number of people, but its consequences are lived by everyone else. The people on the ground in Tel Aviv today did not launch Operation Epic Fury. They did not make the decision to retaliate. They are not the Gang of Eight. They are not the president or the prime minister or the supreme leader. They are the people who live with what those decision makers decide, and they deserve, at minimum, to be seen, to be named, to be counted as more than a number in a headline. I want to end this video the way I started it, not with a political argument, not with a call to action about which party was right or wrong, not with a prediction about how this conflict ends, with a person. Somewhere in Tel Aviv right now, a family is in shock. They are sitting in a hospital, or they are at home, or they are at a morgue, and they are trying to process the fact that someone they love, someone they saw this morning or last night or whenever they last saw them, is gone. That person had a life. They had a history. They had things they cared about and people who cared about them in ordinary days full of the small moments that make up a human existence. And today, they became a casualty in a conflict that is being analyzed and argued about on television and in Congress and on social media, turned into evidence for arguments on both sides, cited as proof of whatever the person citing them already believed. They deserve better than that. All of them do. The dead, the wounded, the service members under fire, the Iranian civilians celebrating strikes on a regime that has oppressed them, the Israeli families in shelters, the children who heard sirens this morning. This is the cost of what is happening, in human terms, in the only terms that ultimately matter. Senate Decode is going to keep covering this story. We are going to cover the politics, the strategy, the constitutional debates, the congressional votes, all of it, because all of it matters. But we are never going to cover it in a way that forgets the people inside it. If this video meant something to you, if it helped you feel the weight of this moment in a way that the breaking news alerts haven't, share it right now. Send it to someone who needs to slow down and think about what this day actually means. Drop a comment and tell me what you're feeling as you watch this unfold. I want to hear from you. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, please. This community exists because people believe that politics should never lose its humanity. Join us. This is Senate Decode. Take care of yourselves tonight. I'll see you in the next one.